Okay, chapter 1 is all about a first look at interpersonal communication. This is a great chapter because it introduces you to the 3 models of communication, the definition of interpersonal communication, as well as the 5 or 6 principles of communication. And I plan on covering all 3 of those main topics in this video lecture today. Sorry for my appearance. It's late afternoon and it's on my to-do list, so that's what I'm crossing off. Okay, so the beginning of the chapter, they talk about interpersonal needs theory, developed by William Schutz in 1966. This is important because I know there's a question about this on your first module exam. And William Schutz decided that our needs in order to meet our needs, 3 things have to happen. They must meet our affection, or we need affection, inclusion, and control. So everybody wants to feel loved. We desire that feeling to give love and to be loved by others. Trying to think of a movie where this would best be. Think of Rachel in Glee. Now, I know some of you might be older and not watch Glee, so if you can turn it on just once, like you find a YouTube clip, and just on Rachel, Rachel had this need to be loved, to love Finn, as well as that need to be loved by Finn. And even the high school counselor, Gemma Mays, whose character's name I can't remember, she, even though she's OCD, she has that need to feel loved as well as be loved by others. The second one is inclusion, and we all want to feel included in groups. And the third one is control. We have this desire, this innate desire to control the outcomes of stuff. Like, I can't control getting a full-time job, so it stresses me out that I don't have that control. All I know is that I can do the best that I can. Well, 2 years later, Abraham Maslow in 1968 came out with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, if you've had a psychology course, you've heard of this before. And if you've taken public speaking, you've heard of this before. Now, depending on the textbook, depends on how many layers. Wood presents Maslow's hierarchy of needs with 5 layers. The bottom, most basic level, is our basic needs. And in these basic needs are the needs to food, air, water, and sex for procreation, not recreation. So we need to eat to survive. We need air to survive. We need water to survive. And so that our species does not go the way of the dodo birds, we need sex to procreate, to recreate other members of our species. I am not saying that you need to, like, jump your spouse or partner tonight. That is not the point of that. But rather, it's important to have sex to recreate our species. Maslow Hierarchy of Need, 1968. So, there are 3 models of communication. And what's interesting about these models is how they have been built upon each other. And I always think of my mini lecture that I had to do when I was first applying for jobs, and it was on the the 3 models of communication. The first model is the linear model of communication, developed by Lasswell. And Lasswell presented those 5 questions, but in this linear model of communication, we have a sender who sends a message through a channel to a receiver. And sometimes there's noise. Now think about it. What's missing? Is communication one way? Do you start an active communication, send a message to someone through a channel, and do that? Does that person not answer you back? Communicate back? Got you thinking. Well, that was one of the flaws with this linear model of communication, is because it didn't offer that feedback between that receiver who received that original message and that sender. So Shannon and Weaver presented the interactive model of communication. This time we have a sender who sends a message through a channel to a receiver, and the receiver offers feedback, and there's always noise going on. And there are 4 types of noise. There's psychological, physiological, semantic, physical, psychological, semantic. I can't remember the fourth noise right now. Oh, nothing like being caught on camera and not remembering something. Oh, it's right there. Physiological, physical, psychological, and semantic. Physical is your child screaming, the phone ringing. I was on the phone earlier today and the doorbell rang. That was physical noise. Physiological is could be stress. I have so much going on in my mind that right now that I have noise in it. Internal noise, and it's affecting how I send and receive messages. Psychological noise is those mental problems or non-mental problems that one may have. And then semantic is word choice or how someone pronounces it. For example, my partner and my father are both from New England, and at times find it difficult to understand them because of semantic noise, and they both like to mumble. So that adds noise. It's not that I'm not receiving the message, it just affects how I receive their messages. And then the last model is the transactional model, because the problem with the interactive model was that it makes it look like it's circular. Sender always sends the message, receiver always offers feedback. That's not how we communicate. Communication is an ongoing process. It's transactional. So instead of being a sender and a receiver, we're transceivers. So we're constantly sending and receiving messages. We're wearing both hats. So that's important. Other words associated with the models of communication include context influences how messages are communicated. You don't communicate the same way you do in McDonald's as you would in the Olive Garden or even Texas Roadhouse. I'm trying to think of restaurants that are still popular in Jacksonville. Then there's the process that we receive messages and send messages. What we do is we take everything that's going on in our head and we give it words and symbols, which you'll understand later in chapter 4, and that's called encoding. And that makes up the message. And then the receiver takes that message and they take those words and they add their own meaning to them, so they're decoding the message. And then there's that shared meaning. What history do the two people in the Communication Act bring to this process of communication? Martin Buber, defining interpersonal communication, moving on, is very popular in interpersonal communication because of the I, it, I, you, and I, thou concepts that he presented. I, it is when you communicate to another person and you treat them like an object. I'm trying to think of an example because I try very hard not to do this, but maybe I do this to the people I pass when I mall walk in the morning, because I don't talk to them and I just move myself around them as if they're that train. My mall just got a train, and they park it in the middle, so it's a pain in the butt for the walkers in the morning. It's an object, and I just walk around it, and that's how I sometimes treat other mall walkers, as objects. Not very polite of me, I know. IU communication occurs when we recognize the other person and treat them. We recognize them as a person and treat them that way. UPS delivered a package to me this afternoon. I was very nice to the UPS man. Was very excited to receive that package. So that's when you treat you're not being intimate with that person, but you're treating them as if they are a person and not an object. And I-thou communication is we understand the unique characteristics of the other person we're communicating with, and that comes across in our communication. So, Wood defines interpersonal communication as selective, systemic, unique, processual transactions that allow people to reflect and build personal knowledge of one another and create shared meanings. It's important that you understand the difference between content meanings and relational meanings. Content are those literal or dictionary definitions behind the word, whereas relational meanings are the understandings we have of the word because of the relationship we have with others. And the only example I can think of is not appropriate, so I can't share it. Then there are the 8 principles of communication. Principle 1, which goes back to the model of communication, which is why there was a problem with the linear, is that you cannot not communicate. So even if you are not hitting reply to an email or you ignore a voicemail, you are in fact communicating with the other person. 90% of our communication is nonverbal. So silence is a form of nonverbal behavior. So when you're sending the message of silence, you are in fact communicating. So in fact, when you give someone the silent treatment, you are still communicating. Principle number 2 is interpersonal communication is irreversible. So any bad habits you may have picked up in your lifetime, you can break those bad habits and develop good habits. It involves ethical choices, which is principle number 3. You have to make the decision to do the right thing. If you, for example, I flew home for the holidays and was not very nice to the gate attendant at US Airways when she was trying to force me to check my carry-on bag. I had to make the ethical choices to not call her a name to her face or to lose my temper in the middle of the airport and be hauled away by TSA agents. Principle number 4, people construct meanings in interpersonal communication. It's how we develop that shared history, that shared meaning, which is important in the communication models. Principle number 5, metacommunication affects meanings. And metacommunication is communication about communication. Principle 6 is interpersonal communication develops and sustains relationships. You wouldn't have friends, you wouldn't still be in contact with siblings or exes or your parents if you weren't using communication. You need communication to sustain those relationships. And when communication goes, so goes the relationship. Principle 7, it is not a panacea or pansea. Just because you use communication doesn't mean it's going to save everything. It's not the cure-all to save all. And principle number 8 is interpersonal communication effectiveness can be learned. So you can learn to be better communicators, and I hope that is one of the things you take away this semester is how to be a better communicator in your relationships. When I first started dating my partner, he got a little worried because my bookshelves are filled with books about relationships and relational communication, because that is what I am working on for my doctorate in communication, is I am going to be an assistant professor of interpersonal communication. And he asked, should I be worried? You have all these books about relationships. And I said, I study that which I don't do well. I rock at giving public speeches. I'm very comfortable talking to a video camera and lecturing. I'm comfortable in front of a classroom and lecturing. But it's that interpersonal, that one-on-one communication where I know I need to continue to work. And I know, based on principle number 8, that effectiveness can be learned. So I've learned to be more open in my relationship with my partner. Too much information, but may understand why I might come across short or you have to stick to your deadlines, is that I am on the market for a full-time job. And I am scared that he will follow me wherever I get a job and not be happy. And I've communicated that to him, as opposed to keeping it inside myself and doing intrapersonal, I-N-T-R-A, communication. So it's important that you see what bad habits you have, and you learn to be more effective. You break those habits. And know that there's no takebacks in communication. Once it's said, it's out there. So never say I want a divorce or I want to break up because subconsciously that's what you really want to do. You can't ever take that back. So that is important stuff from chapter 1 in a nutshell. Hopefully you read the chapter. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at either one of those addresses. And see you next week, or you'll see me next week when I go over chapter 6. Have a great week and good luck with your discussion board and your journal.